Good morning and welcome to Crack the Mic podcast with Agent of Change, DeCorey Davis. And this week's segment is entitled Racism in America is a Learned Behavior Part 2. And to help me further this discussion, we have a sagacious panel. Keon Payton, Senior Pastor of the New Bethel Missionary Baptist Church in Pontiac, Michigan, Executive Director of Community Outreach for Realm Films International, and a graduate of Princeton Theological Seminary. Attorney Michael T. Davis, an established attorney and minister of the gospel. He also serves as the president of the Florida Statewide Association of Black Lawyers, and most recently secured a settlement valued at $4.5 million for an unarmed Black teen who was paralyzed by a police after being shot in the back for the law firm Cooney and Davis Law PA. He also is barred in both Florida and New York. Jeffrey Watson, former Miami-Dade County City Commissioner for District 5. Dr. David Bullock, a gifted genius. He is a teacher, lecturer, pastor, artist, and a social commentator that has appeared on MSNBC's The Ed Show, Rachel Maddow's Show, Russia Today, Jesse Lee Peterson radio show, and Sirius XM's The Joe Madison Show. He also is a contributor to the New York Times, UK Daily, USA Today, just to name a few. And last but certainly not least, motivational speaker, owner of Crown Security Company, and executive to the podcast, Isaiah Williams. Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's been often said that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words cannot hurt me. However, I argue to the contrary, because words are powerful and can have long-lasting effects. In fact, in a blog written by Dr. Haider Zaid titled The Power of Spoken Words, he quoted Hada Burge, in which he suggested that words are singularly the most powerful force available to humanity. And I couldn't agree with him more, because we've seen the long-lasting impact of words or racial jargon used in the past by white racists like the N-word, Negroes, and coloreds that has reverberated throughout the history of the country, the United States of America, and how it has aided in the mistreatment of people of color. In fact, in that same article mentioned before, the writer cautioned us by saying, considering the powerful force of the words we utter, we must discipline ourselves to speak in a way that conveys respect, gentleness, and humility. And this week, Isaiah has a question. He will start the discussion with the panel. Go ahead, Isaiah.
In your opinion, is racism natural and common among all people, or is it only prevalent in America?
Dr. Bullock, you want to lead the discussion?
Definitely. What question was this? Is racism natural and common? Is that the question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think, and we talked about some of this in the first segment. I want to be very careful about using words like natural and common. Race is socially constructed. Racism is a learned behavior. To what degree it's natural or not, I don't know. Among all people, I don't know. I do think that obviously there is a history of racist individuals and racist institutional practices in the United States of America. If you look at the globalized colonial world or post-colonial world, obviously there is a economic and political social globalized white supremacy that's born out of what Europe did to the rest of the world after the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. And so the history is what it is. I don't think words like natural help us in this conversation. And I don't think words like or phrases like common to all. I mean, we're not talking about sin, we're talking about racism.
I echo that sentiment, Dr. Bullock. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts, Reverend Peyton?
I said, I think Dr. Bullock just dropped the mic on that one. I think we can keep that one right there.
Okay, you want to go ahead and share your thoughts, Mr. Watson? Mr. Watson, you want to go ahead and share your thoughts?
I understand his perspective on natural and common, but I think the more maybe relevant statement would be racist behavior. Is it only prevalent in America? And does that mean when that question is asked, America in the global context versus other countries? Is that what that question is meant? Racism, natural or common among people, or is it only in prevalent in America? Is that what that was meant to say?
I believe that is the question, Mr.
Yeah.
Watson.
Yeah, because I mean, look, I've traveled the world pretty much from east to west, and in most instances, we're the youngest country probably constituted. And from that perspective, most other countries consider themselves, notwithstanding either religious or some other beliefs in a country, most people consider themselves of that country, right? And so, you know, the Colombians consider themselves Colombians, and the Brazilians consider themselves Brazilians, regardless of the hue of the person. That's what they consider themselves. Now they have issues of separation based on economics, and invariably, I found that more prevalent in other countries than here, right, in America. But there, I don't experience now the issue of racism so much. Matter of fact, I hear certain things about certain countries in commentary that my experience in those countries, I've been treated better there than I've been treated here in America. And so, and that's probably a whole nother topic. But clearly, to say that it's natural or common would be something different, but it's definitely something that's probably more germane to America. Two things that are said about Americans. The most segregated time in America is during the hours of church on Sunday. And the most integrated time in America is at a entertainment or sporting event where we all rooting for the same team, right, locally. And so from that perspective, I also wouldn't necessarily use natural common, but it's definitely something that has more of a ring in America than it does in most other countries, if that's what that was designed to say or ask.
Attorney Michael Davis, you want to share your thoughts on the question?
So, you know, the question that you've asked is racism natural and common among all people, or is it prevalent in America? And I like that answer. We had or I like that question. And it reminds me of the Black History program we had at our church. We had a cultural day where members from every country within our church brought food, and they set up a nice little booth, and, you know, they served food and they had things from their country. So, you know, you had Haitians had the Haitian flag, people from Jamaica had the Jamaican flag, you know, people from Bahamas had the Bahamas flag, you know, and so on and so on. When it came to the Black section, we did not have the United States of America flag. We had a flag that was unique to Black people that someone found. And, you know, one of the persons who's from one of the other countries pointed that out to me. And I think at that moment, I really got it. You know, in America, racism is very prevalent. We, as Black people, have been told for centuries that we're not America. And I think the outcome of that is that when we think of our culture, we don't necessarily see ourselves as, you know, just being America, like members of the United States of America. We see more ourselves as being Black Americans or African American. So yeah, I think that racism is not natural and common everywhere. But it really is prevalent here in the United States.
Okay, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. All right, let's just change the tide for a moment if we can. In his book, White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Race, Robin DiAngelo in 2018 suggested that white fragility as a theory is confirmation of my belief that inducing guilt in white was never the end goal in itself. Now, for just educational purposes, I like to enlighten the audience. If you do not know what white fragility is, I'll just simply break it down. It's the discomfort and defensiveness of on the part of a white person when confronted by information about racial inequalities and injustices. Now, let me just ask the panel this question, if I may. Do you feel that it's white fragility when white people fail to accept that their words used in the past, like the N-word, Negroes, and coloreds, have aided in the mistreatment of African Americans, both past and present?
Look, you have to separate and really be clear with context. And I'll go back to something Pastor said, and someone else mentioned as well. Look, as when the Dred Scott and slave decision was handed down, therein it ended. However, I've heard many speeches from many of our iconic leadership talk about proud Negroes in the colored race, although that's not pretty much accurate. And so white folks using Negroes was something that we used as a description during a time. Colors used as a description during that time, not to be any longer called slave, right? And so I don't think that was necessarily spoken in a negative tone, more so than some folks who were racist saying nigger and niggers and using it to be demeaning at that time and henceforward from the time that it's been used, because that was always meant to be a demeaning word, as opposed to descriptive words that were used for the time as us being described as a person. So is it white fragility? I think it's stupidity is what it was. Okay. I know about white fragility because, everybody, we always now reframing something to be something else. It's stupidity. And most of it came from people either ignorant, okay, who didn't know, or people who now wanted to put on a sheet, was intelligent and did it nonetheless. But it was ignorance and stupidity is what it was, right? And so yes, when they use niggers, they use that word. It was meant to be a demeaning word. It was meant to horrify us. It was meant to scare women and children. And in most instances, it was meant to now give an excuse to some real crazy behavior, without question.
Well stated, Mr. Watson. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts on this here, Dr. Bullock?
Yes, I think very interesting conversation. I think white fragility is a growing conversation in the field of white studies, which is like the companion intellectual discourse for critical race theory. Definitely, do white
That's
people,
true. That's
right?
true.
Yeah. So, do white people feel fragile, right? Offended? Do they have a certain psychological response to being confronted with not only their individual ideas and beliefs, but also the institutional racist practices that continue to perpetuate disparities between whites and blacks in this country? Of course, they have a hard time facing those things. But I would agree with the commissioner to this point that, look, we are all fragile when confronting vulnerability. So whether that be the substance abuser not wanting to confront the fact that he or she should not imbibe alcohol, right? Or the sex addict, or even Brother Will Smith. I mean, having to face the fact that whether or not the slap was a true slap or not, he still ended up looking like an idiot, right? So
absolutely,
to face that
Amen.
fact, right?
Amen. Thank you.
So vulnerability and fragility go together, right? Now, I think what's interesting about this is that white people feel vulnerable when Black people and other white people expose the vulnerability of Black people to white people. That's what's interesting about this, right? Wow. You feel they feel vulnerable and fragile when confronted with the reality that the rules may not be the same, the outcomes are obviously different for arbitrary reasons, and that there is a history of disparity that cannot be ignored, and that despite their intention or goodwill, we are all participating in a rigged game. And so now people feel vulnerable. Well, that may just be the same way men feel when women say me too. Right? That may just be the way heterosexuals feel when folks who are not heterosexual and are non-binary say, I live in a patriarchal heterosexual sexual society. I mean, I guess all I'm saying is that I don't really have a feeling about this as much as nobody wants to be told that they are a part of a system that oppresses somebody else.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so when you face that fact, you may feel fragile.
I welcome that sentiment. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts, Dr. Payton?
Yeah, I echo David's thoughts. Maybe I keep deferring to him because we both have that Morehouse training, Dr. Davis.
Uh-huh.
But as we were having this discourse, I think that what came to my mind was the story of David. You know, when Nathan had to confront him, I think it goes back to how our words are not just our words, but I think you said it, Dr. Davis, that words come from the soul.
Absolutely.
And so if our words derive from the soul, then if I consider the words that I have been conveying that may have lended themselves to death and oppression, then what does that mean about who I am inherently? And when a person has to look themselves in the mirror, as David did when confronted by Nathan, to recognize, wow, I really am this monster, then with that reflection, I have a responsibility to acknowledge that I am, and I have monster tendencies, or I could have been what I also hated. But at the same time, I think what that does for a person who really has the faith of wanting to be right and wanting to be approved by God, because I think it also, the soul kind of goes back to wanting to be approved by God. I think when a person has that level of confrontation, if their heart is pure, then they would be the person who would choose to do as David did, repent and turn from that behavior. And I think what's difficult in that moment of vulnerability and having to choose is that perhaps some people fear that with the prospect of choice, they may continue to be the monster. And
wow. Powerful.
I feel that is a part of the fear that people have when they really don't know who they are, or they have the courage to love and the courage to repent and accept God's grace and love for them. So I think it's a very deep point. I think Dr. Bullock, kind of scratched the surface of that, but biblically, I reflect on David and his having to challenge his monstrous activities through the prophet Nathan.
That's powerful. Well stated, Dr. Payton. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts, Attorney Davis?
Yeah. So, my thoughts are a little different on this, because, the question is, do you feel that it's white fragility when white people fail to accept that, the past words have aided in the mistreatment of African Americans past and present? And, I would say yes sometimes, but probably no sometimes. The truth is that not everyone has participated in the use of those words in a way to mistreat African Americans. The truth is that there are rap artists who include some of these words in their lyrics. Their lyrics are are designed to be repeated, right? It's a catchy tune that you have people using those words. And, there's this, I could see the perspective of someone who hears the music, they pay for the album, they're listening to the music, and they repeat the album, and they repeat the words, and all of a sudden, they're being confronted or being called racist because they repeated lyrics in a piece or a song or rap by someone who created those lyrics and those raps for them to purchase. So I kind of see both sides of this issue. But those are sort of my thoughts, sort of mixed thoughts. But then again, though, right? If I use those words in the past, I can't be offended if people confront me with what I've done in the past.
Absolutely.
That's not reasonable. In every area of our society, if you commit a crime and you get caught, you have to do the time. There's due process, but if at the end of the day it's determined that you actually committed the crime, you have to do the time.
I welcome that sentiment, Attorney Davis. You want to share your thoughts, Isaiah?
Yes. After hearing the panelists speak, a Bible verse came to mind for me, and it's this: fathers shall not be put to death because of their children, nor shall children be put to death because of their fathers. Each one shall be put to death for his own sin. To me, it's not necessarily white fragility, but it's just the fact that you don't want to be held accountable for something that someone in the past did. And with that in mind, I don't hold any white person living today accountable for slavery. I don't hold them accountable for Jim Crow segregation. What I hold them accountable for is systemic racism. I hold them accountable for different things that they are doing now to suppress voting rights, different things that they are doing to the community. You understand what I mean? I'm looking at not things that are done in the past before I was even born, but I'm looking at things that are transpiring now. And those are the sins or the problems that I have and the things that I want to hold them in account for.
I couldn't agree with you more, Isaiah. And living in the moment is what's most important. And we may have someone out there saying, well, listen, I cannot be held accountable for the trespasses of my ancestors, be as it may. But you can be held accountable for things as Isaiah so wonderfully stated, things like systemic racism, Jim Crow laws that's been enacted to perpetuate this whole ideal of racism. So I couldn't agree with you more, but let me just change the tide for a moment if I can, because one may say, and I want to deal with this this next question: do you believe that a negative mindset like white supremacy can be obliterated from the mindset of white people by changing patterns in education? Now, let me just say this, if I may, because we know that if you look at the stages of how the learner learn, you know that most of his development and his learning experience takes place in the home. And family is where we learn most of what we learn growing up, if we want to talk about with respect to behavior patterns. Now, I say this here: if in a home of a racist, the leitmotif or the recurring theme is racism, then it is incumbent upon a system, an educational system, to stop that way of thinking and to re-educate the learner. So I want to just ask my panel, if I may, do you believe that a negative mindset like white supremacy can be obliterated from the mindset of white people by changing patterns in education?
Most definitely. I mean, that's a no-brainer. My child goes to Sunday school, and I send my child to Sunday school because I know that if she goes to church and learns child-appropriate concepts about Christ, God, and his sacrifice for us on Calvary, she'll understand that. they did a unit on the 10 Commandments, and my daughter came home talking about, thou shalt not lie. They did fruit of the spirit. To this day, my 4-year-old sits at the dinner table, will say, when my 1-year-old is, not being patient, she understands patience, Harrison, let's be patient. And you can't tell me that if we're in a society where we teach our children to not be racist, to be considerate, to be loving, that's not going to be effective. It is going to be effective. That's why we try to send our children to the best schools, because we know that education is power.
I just want to jump in here because I agree with what we should say as civilized, educated, secularized African-American men in America about the power of education to socialize and transform people in ways so that racism gets eradicated. But there are so many myths, like if all countries are democracies, there'll be no war. If there's a basic guaranteed income, there'll be no poverty. I want to put on my pastor hat and use a theological lens. Born in sin, shapen in iniquity. Cain did not go to school to learn how to kill. It was in him. Noah got off the boat and got drunk. That was in him. And not discounting what education can do. Abraham went before Pharaoh and lied about who his wife was. There's something about human beings that modern science and modern education refuses to accept. We are that crooked timber called humanity, right? We are that treasure, but surrounded by clay. And so while I would agree that education may be able to turn the tide for some, it will never turn the tide for all. There will always be conflict, hate, division, jealousy, envy, rudeness, racism. We will never outpace humanity with education.
I welcome that sentiment. You want to go and share your thoughts, Isaiah?
Yes. Honestly, I don't agree with education being the method to changing, the mindset of anybody. I have 2 children, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And to me, I don't want them learning anything in school besides reading, math, and science. You know what I mean? Maybe history or art. Those are the things that I send them to be taught, not to be indoctrinated into anything. I'm not a very secular person. I'm not. I'm a very avid believer, and one thing that I have a problem with, outside of the different things about race and the different American values that are taught, is just about like sex education. To me, if you can't educate your child on how to operate with other kids and what's appropriate and what's not, when it's the time, if you can't communicate that to your kid, then maybe you need someone to do it for you. But I wouldn't recommend their teachers. I wouldn't have them learn from their peers, because every time I look with my children, they're learning something negative from their peers. They're learning how to emulate things that I don't want them to do. So, why would I send them with the intention that they should learn something when everything that I've seen up until this point has been things that I disagree with and things that I'm trying to take back out of them?
Absolutely. I welcome that sentiment. You want to go and share your thoughts, Dr. Payton?
Yeah, I think Isaiah offers an interesting perspective. I think where I sit is they say you can't legislate morality, but how can we in our systems of education do a better job of teaching empathy? When I think about the parable of the Good Samaritan, as Christians, we believe in the law of Christ, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, and your neighbor as yourself. And of course, we know the story, Jesus gives the illustration of, who is my neighbor? Um, who is that person who is different, right? And how do we get people to come to a place where they evaluate who they are from the perspective of how they want, how they would want to be treated? You know, how do we teach that? And I think that there are ways. My children upstairs are upstairs now, you know, and they have all these wonderful cartoons and shows that they watch. But what I really love, you know, I sat up last night with them watching popcorn, eating popcorn, and watching a show called Turning Red, which is about a little girl who was different and was noticing her differences and the struggle and challenges that she had in that way. But the way that the film, the way that the cartoon told the story, it was one where you were able to empathize with characters and discern, you know, how you would want to be treated. And in my conversation with my children about their cartoons, I can see that they are learning lessons of empathy. And if that can be demonstrated in a cartoon, how much more could we be intentional in creating curricula that helps our children to look at life from a more empathetic lens? And if we could do a better job at that, I think that becomes that mirror moment more frequently when people have to really decide what kind of person they are. And if we can continue to, in creative ways, cause people to have that mirror moment, right? In church, in the Black Baptist Church at New Bethel, we do it every first Sunday when we quote unquote take communion. You know, we take communion to do a self-examination of how we're treating our brothers and sisters. But I think that needs to be more frequent. It needs to be more than if I decide to go to church, and that's the message that the pastor actually is preaching on when giving communion that I only get, you know, periodically. How can we infuse that more in ways where we can be better educated to look at life from a more empathic perspective?
Couldn't agree with you more, Dr. Payton. You want to go and share your thoughts, Mr. Watson?
Well, my immediate answer is to say no. That's it. It can't be obliterated by changing, you know, behavior patterns in education. And then I defer and default to, I think it was Isaiah, who almost sounded like the speech I just heard Governor DeSantis say. I want my kids to be taught reading, writing, and arithmetic. I don't want you now teaching them something else or trying to indoctrinate something else. And I will defer and say, I mean, education, be it formal or informal, most of us will defer to say the education being in the school. And at the end of the day, our kids are losing being taught what they're supposed to be taught. I don't really want them to now, them being teachers, having to have the responsibility of teaching things that we should be teaching our kids ourselves. And so, can it be taught? No, I don't think you can teach something out of someone or a negative mindset, because you have them for a minute, they have them for a minute, they're home in environments for a whole lot longer. And so, can patterns, behavior patterns in education change them? Probably not. Not if you go back to the example that was given from Isaiah, who had issue with his teacher, Yeah, some of these teachers are in effect treating kids that way. The system as it's being set up now is treating kids that way. I tell the story that when I was in Title I in the 7th grade, that was for students who excel. That was in public school. Now, if you ask somebody about Title I, X amount of years, umpteen years later, it's for kids who are not excelling, right? Who changed that, right? That's how I learned Spanish. That's how I learned geometry. That's how I learned what I needed to learn, because it was focused on what I needed to learn, not somebody trying to tell something or tell me something else. That I learned at home and in church. I didn't learn that in school. That wasn't those teachers' responsibility to do that. And I'm now a product of a split education, both segregated and integrated. I hate to admit that age factor, but I am. And so consequently,
Okay.
um, I say no, it can't be. And they in school shouldn't be now having that responsibility. Not at all.
I welcome that sentiment. But, let me just say this here, if I may, because I do echo the sentiments of our beloved Governor Ron DeSantis when he stated education over indoctrination. But let me play the devil's advocate for a moment, because I do believe that if a negative learned behavior was put in place at the start by family, if we're talking about a racist environment where the reoccurring theme is racism in the home, then it is incumbent upon us as a society, which public education is funded by the government, to help those kids understand what diversity is. Now, let me just say this here, because according to an article published in Brookings by Rashawn Ray and Alexandria Gibbons, entitled "Why Are States Banning Critical Race Theory?" They suggested that CRT has become a new boogeyman for people unwilling to acknowledge our country's racist history and how it impacts the present, end quote. It is the new elephant in the room, I argue. In fact, in that same article, they suggested that Fox News has mentioned CRT 1,300 times in less than 4 months. But I just want to send this caveat out here. And a lot of opponents of this theory says that it teaches hate. So having said all of this, let me ask the panel, if I may. Do you feel that the critical race theory should be taught in secondary schools as part of the plan for changing behavioral patterns in education? And if so, why or why not? You want to start us off, Dr. Payton?
Sure. Can you just repeat that question one more time for me?
Yes. Do you feel that the critical race theory should be taught in secondary schools as part of the plan for changing behavioral patterns in education? And if so, why or why not?
Well, I believe that truth should be taught in our classrooms. The truth of history, the truth of how we have arrived to where we are, and particularly even as you related the recent, I guess that was an executive order. I don't know if it was a bill that DeSantis passed there in Florida, but the bill on Don't Say Gay. It's very hypocritical for a governor to suggest that critical race theory, the truth of history, the truth of the African American, or the truth of Black history in America, can't be taught when it will help to alleviate the lies around history and the lie that Blacks are inherently different. It's difficult to not want to teach that truth while at the same time creating a hateful law that does just as much harm to the LGBTQ community. And I feel that in classrooms, children should know truth. But going back to what I stated earlier with respect to the previous question, I think it also applies, is that I think there is a way that we can have more what I call trauma-informed literacy, trauma-informed curriculum that does actually teach from a perspective where children have to be empathetic. And whether that's in regard to race or whether that's in regard to sexuality, how do we teach in classrooms that it's not okay to use words or to create systems that make other people feel less than? And so to your point, Dr. Davis, I agree that to the extent that that lesson is not being taught or not being learned in the home because of environments that facilitate hate, as a larger society and culture, we have a responsibility to work toward obliterating the systems of evil and oppression that affect all of us. And so I do feel that there are ways that if we can work toward reconciliation, it must begin with truth. And so I feel that it's our responsibility to teach truth to our children in classrooms.
Thank you for sharing your sentiment, Dr. Payton. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts, Mr. Watson?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to defer to something that I know and believe in, and maybe it's in a time differential. Right? I read a report earlier last year that was done earlier last year, and in the context of who you are, I think you should be taught to that by your parents and at home. When you get into a classroom, unless I'm sending you now, and we now have the debate about different educational environments. That report that was sanctioned or summoned or requested by the Dade County School Board indicated that 44% of our kids are deficient in science, okay, math, and reading. 44%. 67% of Hispanic kids and 83%, so it's inverted. So 66% of our kids, or 56% of our kids cannot read on a proficient, add, okay, and write level. And only 83% or 17% of Anglo kids are deficient. And what that speaks to is the ability to not be able to go into classes, go into schools, go into public schools, okay, to learn and thrive, okay? And with 120,000 to 140,000 jobs open annually, that over the course of a working lifetime will cause you to make more than them guys you be watching run up and down the court and run up and down the field, okay? Okay? Having a $200,000 a year job is going to make you feel differently. I don't care if somebody call you Boogaloo, okay? And so that whole issue about we spending time in some area, we want, look, okay? Our kids are not being educated on the basic fundamentals of what they need to survive. Therein then comes the shootings. Therein then comes all those other negative factors that seep in. Because I found, and it's true, and somebody did a study, somebody sitting in one of them 40 schools have done a study. When you got something to protect, you act differently than when you don't. And so my whole notion about teaching anything other than what's necessary is you see how this world is turning, okay? The whole issue in the financial system is turning. That's what these kids need to know, okay? They know that. They master AI, and they master crypto, and they master where it's turning. Because if they don't master it now, we're going to continually, and now in the future, be left behind a whole nother generation of people who are now going to be left out. And so that whole notion of teaching anything other than what's necessary to get one of them jobs, because you know what? Here's what happens. Don't teach them. They don't know. Well, where do they feel the jobs from? People from China and India. They just named somebody today. Take over Microsoft. One of these companies was India. Then we get mad, they come in. People get mad, they come in. Well, they come in because, you know, when they start learning it in the second and third grade. So I'm not saying not teaching it is the answer, but I'm also saying if we start making sure that what should be taught is being taught, then some of those other things that we household, we church, we other environments of our community should be teaching our kids to be strong. And when they're now thriving in a society where we want them to thrive, when they're doing that, all that other stuff, it's not going to affect you as much as it would otherwise. And I'll leave it that way.
Okay, thank you for sharing. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts, Dr. Bullock?
I mean, if this is a conversation about should critical race theory be taught, then the obvious answer is yes. The question should be, what do we mean by critical race theory? You've got the 1619 Project. You've got the work of Charles Mills, the great philosophical mind who just passed away a couple years ago. You have the work of Frantz Fanon. You have the work of C.L.R. James. What's crazy to me is that Black people understand critical race theory through the lens of people who don't want to teach it and don't know what it is. And so I think if we're talking about understanding institutional globalized white supremacy as an economic, political, and social system, it should be taught. If you can teach kids that Columbus discovered America when he didn't, if you can teach kids that nobody had built civilization in Africa before it was colonized, and that's not true. If you can teach folks that somehow the Greeks learned mathematics without going through Egypt, and the Pythagorean theorem can only be used to build pyramids, but somehow Pythagoras is a Greek, but he didn't get that from Egypt. I mean, we teach all kinds of things. And so why should we participate in the mythology that is taught in school and not fight for the truth to be taught, namely that since the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution and modernity, the world was colonized by Europe. And with that came political, social, and economic domination. We can only be free.
You only get 6 hours in the day, and that's not going to get them from point A to point B.
Well, let me tell you something.
It should be taught somewhere.
They won't get to point B if they don't understand that the game is rigged.
Well, I understand the game rigged, and I got to point B. So understand the game. We get caught up in the game. It's rigged.
But the numbers suggest that you are one of the best and brightest, few and far between.
And I know it's rigged. And I know it's rigged. So here's the thing. Okay. Here's the thing. Teach the play. Okay. That's going to now beat the defense, which the defense is the game is rigged. Because we do a good job doing that, right? Teach the play that's going to help us beat the rigged environment. But if you're only now talking about the environment is rigged, they'll never learn to play to beat the defense.
But of course, critical race theory is not just a negative educational proposal. It is a progressive, positive educational proposal that also teaches solutions. I mean, Black folks have never just critiqued America. We have always critiqued and advanced. And so critical race theory is a part of that advancement. I think it's crazy to disavow under time constraints, not teaching the truth. That's crazy.
Yeah, well.
And as we can see, it is a very heated debate. In fact, in Virginia, in one of their school board meetings, a brawl actually broke out in which proponents of the theory, CRT, were engaging in fisticuffs with those who oppose the theory. So, we'll leave it there. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts, Attorney Davis?
I really don't have anything to add to the discussion, so I'll pass on this one.
Okay, you want to share your thoughts, Isaiah?
Yes, I'm here. Honestly, I think that for me, in my experience, in the home setting, in my home environment, that's where I learned my oral history, where I learned about my ancestors. I don't think that has a place in school, honestly. I haven't seen the research that some of the panelists are referencing. It sounds positive, but just in my experience, I was able to learn about myself, to learn about my people, to learn some of the truths about my people and respect them, and still go to school and learn the fundamentals that I need to learn. When I was in first grade, I went to North Twin Lakes and I went to Liberty City Elementary. And I remember that in neither school none of the first graders, well, the majority of the first graders, besides me and a few handful of other people, could actually read a sentence, could actually read a paragraph, knew their times tables. You know, if it's so hard to grasp the fundamentals, I don't think they have room on the plate for this.
Okay, we welcome that sentiment. Isaiah, you got the next question, sir.
Yes. Dear panelists, in your opinion, can racist behaviors and attitudes be changed, or are they here to stay?
Mr. Watson, you want to share your thoughts on that?
Okay, sorry, I muted myself. Well, man, look, I think anyone is entitled to change across the spectrum. Someone mentioned it earlier. I think it was Pastor mentioned earlier. It might have been Brother David. Anyone is entitled to change from anything that has become a crutch for you, be it alcoholism, whatever the case may be. And so, can racist behaviors and attitudes be changed? Of course they can. They can. Is it something that's here to stay? It's here to stay. Can an individual change? Of course they can. We allow for individuals to change. We allow for individuals to do whatever is necessary to grow. Everybody evolve. Some may never evolve at all. Some of us may change someone's attitude. And so I always like to use examples. I have a friend of mine, just retired, Broward County manager, sister, like my big sister. I followed her through her career. We crossed high school. She was a bit older. Went to the same college. She's the longest serving manager in Broward County history. Right? She told me about a gentleman that was pretty cool. That's what she said. He's pretty cool. He, at her retirement party, and the Deltas raised $100,000 and gave her money for a scholarship fund. You know, some people believe in education, right? And I thought, oh, you know, that's cool. He's gonna match them. I know he'll match them. That white man got up, and he is a typical profile of who we're talking about. You would think. She called him cool. She has changed his behavior for the most part. However, he may have thought. I don't know him. I'm not calling him a racist. But that white guy got up, okay, and he gave her, for her dispensing, $2 million. That's what he gave her. And I cried. Okay, I cried, right? Because yes, people can change. Is racist behavior here to stay? Of course it is. But people can change and be moved by other people. And he said, and I quote, okay, she has soul and she opened my eyes. And I went up and said to him, man, I don't know who you are. She told me you were cool. But I'm telling you, if a whole lot more folks like you were like you, this world would be different. Okay? So yes, people can change. And we sometimes affect people that do change. Because some people grow up with myths of us that are not accurate. And our engagement now, different than mine, our engagement now, because people are with cultures and, you know, different cultures more often and so on and so forth. And so, yes, it can change. But it is, but you know, it's here to stay. Will it continue to, you know, sun up and sun down? Of course. Will it rain some days? Of course it will. And it'll be sunny some days as well. So yeah, some people can change who may have predilections and taught in environments, inherited behavior. Yes, they too can change.
Okay, you want to go ahead and share? Thank you so much for your sentiment, Mr. Watson. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts, Attorney Davis?
Yeah, I agree. I think the story was so appropriate. People can change. Who would we be as men on this podcast to say that people cannot change when we have changed and we continue to change? The hope is that the change will always be for the better.
Okay, thank you for sharing. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts, Dr. Payton?
Yes, I too believe that people can change. I do believe that prejudice and discrimination will always be, and we just have to work in acknowledgement of that, we just have to work harder in being more intentional in teaching the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
All right, thank you for sharing. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts on that question, Isaiah?
Yes. In my opinion, they can be changed. It's just a matter of whether or not that person is willing to change.
Okay. All right. Attorney Davis, you want to share your thoughts?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I apologize. I had technical difficulties. Yeah, people can change. You know, as a person of faith, I believe that Christ has the power to change people. So can people change? I think so, yeah. I think it's going to take God to move in their heart, to break stony hearts in order for it to happen. But I definitely believe that people can change and that racism can change as well, just as God can change any heart.
Okay, thank you for sharing. All right, last question of the evening. Let me just ask this question for the entire panel. Racism in America is always discussed as a Black and white issue, but where do other cultures fall within this discussion? Or does it only pertains to Blacks and white people?
It doesn't only pertain to Black and white people. It doesn't. I mean, there's other cultures that don't like each other based on historical facts and occurrences. There is, the separation of at the time, I don't remember what it was called, forgot the name, just like what's going on now in Europe and Ukraine. Pakistan and India was one, separated. Pakistanis and Indians, they don't get along, right? Is that racist? I don't know how we describe that, but they don't get along. And I've talked to both to know, right? China stays prepared, not because anybody else. China stays prepared because Japan came in and killed a whole bunch of what they conclude innocent Chinese people in some attempt to do something to them, to harm them. And so they stay strong because of Japan, not because of anybody else. We want to now have a boogeyman, but at the end of the day, they don't necessarily get along. Is it racist? It's a Japanese race, I guess, a Chinese race, or is it Asian race? And so it's not only Black and white. We have a preoccupation here because folks want to keep us down, period.
Right.
But it's not just Black and white, not at all. Right. And I will recount over the course of the last maybe 8 or 9 months. I was just in New York looking at garbage cans, talking about because of African Americans beating up on Asians who wasn't doing that to anybody. And so It's not just Black and white, not at all. And no one should believe that it is. I'll say that.
Thank you for sharing, Mr. Watson. You want to go ahead and share, Reverend Payton?
DeCorey, what I was going to say, by the way, to piggyback off what the commissioner said, I think he's correct that racism isn't a wholly Black and white issue. But I will say, though, that it might be a dark-skinned versus light-skinned issue. And I think that's very prevalent in countries that were colonized by Europe. There's just, here in South Florida, there's, Mexicans and Cubans. And you often get the sense that Cubans think they're better than Mexicans because of the lighter skin tone. Or, within Mexicans, there's a distinction between whether you're light-skinned Mexican or dark-skinned Mexican. And, just shades of being mixed. And so I think it's true. It's not necessarily a Black-white thing. I think countries that have been influenced by European colonization have a light-skinned versus dark-skinned complex, whereby the darker you are, the less valued you are.
Wow.
And truth be told, that happens sometimes in the Black community.
And I'd just love to
school days more. You more out in school days. You Atlanta folks, where y'all went to school.
Well, I agree with you both. I think that it's not a Black or white thing in the way you described it, Brother Watson. But in the way that you just spoke, the gentleman who just spoke, Attorney Davis, I think that we can say it's a black or white thing from a way that Blackness, going back to the first segment of our panel discussion, the power of words and how Blackness was demonized and white is deemed to be pure and right and holy. And so those references, I think, in the context of faith and how they're taught with respect to the blacker you are, the more cursed you are, or the whiter you are, the better you are. I think that makes it a black or white issue in those terms. But as Brother Watson said, it's not just a black or white issue.
Okay, we welcome that, Dr. Payton. Dr. Bullock, you want to go?
Definitely. I think everybody has said something that's important. Is racism just an American phenomena? Is it just between blacks and whites? I don't think so. And I think that's why I was kind of saying previously, the critical race theory conversation is a globalized white supremacy education. And so in order for us to get away from the binary understanding of black, white, domestic America, we need a different education protocol.
Powerful. Isaiah, you want to share your thoughts?
Yes. I just want to harken back to our segment on systemic racism, where I was drawing a comparison. In short, black and white people have this thing, this box. When you go to fill out any important document, when you go to apply for a job, to receive any sort of assistance, like on your FAFSA or on your Social Security benefit application, they want to know what race you are. And when you look at the boxes, some people of different ethnicities are able to be categorized as white or other, things besides black. You understand what I mean? So if it wasn't a black and white thing, why is it that people are able to be anything other than black? And people who fall into the category of white in some respects are able to claim white and receive privilege or benefit or recognition that the black person would not receive. To me, the box alone, those deadly boxes, paint a picture that is very much a black and white issue. And until we can, let these white Americans know what is it that we want to be done, what type of solution to the problems that we are facing that we want, there's always going to be a misunderstanding, and there's always going to be a clash of the cultures until we outline exactly what we want to them. And I don't mean as far as like 40 acres and a mule. I mean as far as the policing that they're doing, the judge, we have a lawyer in our panel. So the criminal representation that we have, those types of things that are like a bane in the black man's being, we need to address those and find solutions to those from these white people in order to mend those divides.
Okay. All right. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time for this segment. Racism in America is a Learned Behavior Part 2. I'd like to thank my sagacious panel, Dr. David Bullock, Mr. Jeffrey Watson, Pastor Keon Payton, and Attorney Michael Davis, and Mr. Isaiah Wallace. But I'd like to leave this thought with our listeners by Martin H. Fisher. It is not hard to learn more. What is hard is to unlearn when you discover yourself wrong. Again, I want to thank you for listening to this week's segment, Racism in America, Racism is a Learned Behavior, Part 2. And this is your Agent of Change signing off with Crack the Mic